here today. It's a privilege and honor to be the odd one out. I was told that God created man, and then he gave 2 steps back and he said I could do better than that. And he created woman. So it's a privilege and honor to be with you. My experience working with rural women came as a result of my encounter with the Vice President of the Dominican Republic, Doña Margarita Cedeño de Fernandez. And that encounter that took place after I met her at one of her events where she was speaking about multidimensional poverty, I was discussing with her one of the greatest handicaps that emerging entrepreneurs, especially women, have when it comes to getting financing in the financial services industry, naturally. And that handicap is the fact that most entrepreneurs, emerging entrepreneurs in the rural area, engage in the development of their businesses based on a trial and error method. And trial and error has its place in the business development experience, but we need methodology, yes? Financial people look at methodology. They look at validation in order to decide whether or not to go ahead with the financing of any given project. And most people would say, well, Jonathan, we're talking about rural people. Yes, but methodology is not rocket science. Methodology is very basic. Yes, as Ms. Fernandez was rightly pointing out in her presentation, they proceed based on a methodology to decide how to approach each and every case on a tailored basis, if you will, in a tailored fashion. Methodology starts with observation, yes? What do entrepreneurs take notice of? They take notice of needs, wants, and capabilities within their communities, yes? Sometimes we don't think of what the origin of an entrepreneurial project is, and the origin of an entrepreneurial project is really frustration, yes? Many women engage in entrepreneurial projects based on frustration. They're frustrated with something in their community, and they decide to do something about it, not to whine about it, yes? I got together with a group of women from my country, the Dominican Republic, and we started talking about entrepreneurship. And one interesting definition that came up in one of these training and development sessions that were sponsored, by the way, by the Vice Presidency of the Dominican Republic, program that they have called Progresando con Solidaridad, Progress with Solidarity. And one of the aims of this program is to empower women with technical skills. And what this session in particular was dedicated to raising the awareness about, can you hear me if I move? I like moving. Raising the awareness of what entrepreneurship is all about. So in that session, we were asking women, what do you think entrepreneurship is? I'm going to ask you, what do you think what entrepreneurship is? What comes to mind when you hear the word entrepreneurship? The first word that comes to mind?
Creativity.
Creativity. What else?
Diversity.
What else?
Autonomy.
I was going to say independence.
Independence, yes. And interdependence. And also destruction. Destruction. Entrepreneurship is destruction, yes. And what we need in order to empower our men and women in the rural area is to destroy a system that has neglected the capabilities of rural economies. And that system is the patronage system, regrettably so. Yes, the patronage system that focuses on the mass of the population that in developing countries and also in the developed world is concentrated in urban areas. Yes, that is at the macro level. At the micro level, you destroy things that you don't like in the economy. For example, Mrs. Delia was mentioning monopolistic and oligopolistic competition. Yes, we don't like that. Consumers don't like that because these guys drive prices up. So entrepreneurs seek ways and means to destroy that. Yes, that's what Henry Ford did. He destroyed a monopoly in the area of automobile production. Yes, there were automobiles before Henry Ford started producing automobiles. Yes, but these automobiles were for the ultra-rich. This guy created a system wherein the production of the automobile was cheapened, if you will, and was made more efficient, and he democratized the ability for people to have automobiles. And we have to democratize ways and means for people in the rural area to have access to finance. And whereas we can focus on the problem in itself, I think we should focus as well on the systemic predicament that has created the problem in the first place. I don't know if any of you have heard of William Edward Stedman. William Edward Stedman, he was, if you will, the father of the Japanese Industrial Renaissance. Yes, he went to Japan in the 50s and he started laying the groundwork of what we today know as Kaizen. Yes, this process of continuous improvement. Kai means a change in Japanese, sen means good. Yes, and by improving continuously, they've created the corporate culture that they have today, which is very integrated. Yes, they have been able to kind of interweave the development of the rural area and the urban area. So this gentleman, William Edward Stedman, used to say, we should not focus on the outcome. We should focus on the input. Yes, the outcome can be considered, if you will, financial empowerment. But the input, the raw material for financial empowerment is, yes, the education of rural women when it comes to financial instruments and how to open an account and how to build credit and how to build credibility. But also the raw material for a system where rural entrepreneurs are empowered is an ethical government. And regrettably so, in my part of the world, I'm from the Dominican Republic, and I've been able to travel throughout Latin America and Central America. One of the greatest handicaps that we have is government corruption, is patronage systems that sometimes are enabled by the dynamic that takes place in the first world, in the developed world. For example, here in the United States and in Western Europe, farmers receive hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies. Yes? When the developed world has a natural comparative advantage in the production of agricultural goods. We cannot compete, not because we're not competitive, but because we're not receiving those hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies. Yes? So if NGOs in the first world, in the developed world, want to help farmers down in the developing world, the first thing we have to do is to get rid of the politics. Because as a matter of fact, consumers in the developed world are affected by these subsidies. Yes, but these consumers are not organized so as to say, hey, we don't want that to happen. So you have politicians rigging the system and giving subsidies to these groups that can move the election one way or another. So, whereas, yes, we have to get creative as to how to create financial instruments whereby women can be empowered in the rural area, we also have to fix the system so that that dynamic of economic empowerment can be organic in nature. Yes? For example, this program, Progresando con Solidaridad, has done great things in the Dominican Republic. The International Development Bank put out a study about a year and a half ago, wherein it was able to determine that without this program, in the absence of this program, the level of extreme poverty in the Dominican Republic would be 24% higher. And the level of absolute poverty would be 6% higher. And you would ask me, well, Jonathan, what is this program all about? Well, it's about conditional cash transfers. Yes? But these conditional cash transfers are not merely means tested. Yes? They require that these women go to training and development sessions like these. You see, it's not only okay if you are regarded as poor, indigent in some way, shape, or form. We're going to give you money, and we're going to perpetuate actually your level of indigence, because once you grow out of there, then you're not going to receive the money. So people sometimes don't have an incentive to grow out of that category. But through this program, yes, the Vice President has envisioned a dynamic wherein rural women, yes, are not incentivized to stay in their current predicament, but through education, yes, they can actually use this as a stepping stone. And at the end of the program they graduated, they no longer need the cash transfer because they're profitable organically so. One other aspect of the system that I would like to mention before I conclude is the fact that in our countries, we have a wide income disparity, as you know, and that is because of the fact that whereas we have grown economically, say the Dominican Republic has grown, is one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America. Yes, we've had a lot of growth, but we have not had a level of development that is commensurate with that level of growth. And that is because of the fact that the growth that has taken place is highly concentrated. And it has not spilled over to the rest of the population because of the fact that capitalists are not paying workers what they ought to pay them. They're not, and what are capitalists ought to pay workers? Well, workers ought to receive remuneration as a function of the value that they add. And workers are not being granted the opportunity to add more value because our economies have focused on the production of primary goods. Because, why? Why is this? Why would an economy focus on the production of primary goods? Yes, if it has all the wealth in the world. If it has all the wealth in the world, mind you, Latin America is one of the richest parts of the world. You know why the British and the French and the German came to New England back in the 1600s? It wasn't because this was the creme of la creme. Yeah? It was because this was all that there was left. The Spaniards and the Portuguese got the best slice. All the gold, all the cheap labor was down there. They came up here, they didn't find anything, so they became what? Entrepreneurs. They generated value. See, our economies were built upon a culture of extraction, yes, and we're trying to break away from that. But regrettably so, the system is perpetuating that system. So let's go back to the primary goods argument. In the Dominican Republic, we have an oligopolistic economy, wherein a lot of goods and services that we could produce competitively at home are being imported. And the richest men and some women in my country are importers. They're not exporters. And because of their economic capital, they have a lot of political capital. So they don't necessarily want the rural sector to make the transition to the value-added sector, because then they would substitute their imports. Yes? Now, we have all the raw material. Yes? Not only at the level of our natural resources, but also at the level of our human capital, to add value to those primary goods in order to export them as value-added goods. But we don't do that. Is the Dominican Republic known for producing gourmet chocolate? No. Switzerland is. And Switzerland doesn't produce an ounce of cocoa. You see, the global south has traditionally exported primary goods. What we do, we export sugar and we import candy. We export cocoa, we import chocolate. We export leather, we import shoes. We export iron, we import steel. Yes? And that's what Raul Brevich from the CEPAL described as deteriorating terms of trade. What is your name, I'm sorry? Muna. Say your income goes from $100,000 a year to $150,000 a year. Are you going to consume more sugar? Not necessarily. I mean, all the sugar you could consume, you bought with those first $100,000. If you have additional income, then you have more discretionary income, and you're going to buy gourmet chocolate, if you will. Yes? So what does that tell us? It tells us that the global south is not participating in the increases in wealth that are taking place around the world. Yes? The countries, the entrepreneurs that are participating in that increase in wealth are those that are adding value to the primary good. Yes? If we are to entice the heavyweights in the financial industry to the rural area, we need to go into the value-added sector in the global south. And in order to do that, we need to destroy the patronage system, wherein we have people making decisions not in the best interest of the economy as a whole, but in the best interest of their likelihood of being reelected to office. And I am glad to have participated with a program like Progresando con Solidaridad, with the Vice President of the Dominican Republic, that has opted not to work in order to be popular in the next generation, in the next election, I'm sorry, but she has worked in order to ensure the best interest of the next generation. And I think that if we replicate programs like this throughout Latin America and throughout the global south, we would be taking a significant step toward changing the system. And if we leave with anything from this brief talk that I've given, let's keep with the word destruction. Jonathan, but why destruction? Yes, because we need to destroy a lot of things. You see, entrepreneurship is creative and destructive. That's how Schumpeter described it, a creative and destructive dynamic. And the only way in which we're going to destroy that, which is keeping the talent from the global south from actually being remunerated as a function of its potentiality, is that system that will only be destroyed on the basis of creating. You see, we have things like Chavez in Venezuela that wanted to destroy the system, but not by creating something better, but by promising something that does not work. We need to empower our citizens with knowledge in order for us to make good decisions when it comes to what leaders we're going to put in office. And I think we need more women in office and more ethical men in office in order to change the system and work for those that are willing to give back to our society. Thank you very much. Have a good rest.
What you said needs to be said in a lot more. But so you talked about, the impact of what's happening in the north and the south. Are there any mechanisms or, that you see between the workers in the north and the south, or can there be more mechanisms developed to increase solidarity? Because obviously we're the workers in the north are also suffering from growing inequality, and that the UN Special Rapporteur on Poverty came to the UN and did a really scathing report of what's happening here in December.
Regrettably so, we don't have an infrastructure whereby workers across nations can kind of become acquainted with each other's plight. Yes, but what we should have is a system whereby workers are retrained. Yes, in order to step up to the needs, wants, and capabilities of the economy as it transitions from one level of industrialization to the next. Because this creative destructive process is inevitable. Yes, remember back in the 1800s when the cotton gin came out? What did the cotton gin do? The cotton gin destroyed the work or replaced the work of 50 workers. Yes. Some workers were against the cotton gin, but the cotton gin brought progress to the world. So I think that what our governments ought to do through public policy is institute systems whereby workers are retrained ahead of the coming into being of these disruptive technologies and innovation. Yes? And we ought to create funds in order to ensure that these workers' livelihood are not compromised as they make a transition from one industry to the next. Moreover, we ought to be in the business of educating workers to become entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship in this day and age is becoming a necessity. The other day, an article came out of the New York Times wherein McKinsey, the management consultancy, published a study wherein it found that 49% of jobs in America can and are currently being replaced by artificial intelligence. And when you look deeply into that study, you realize the fact that most of the jobs that are being replaced are those that have to do with repetitive work. You see, everything that is repetitive is automated. what is creative in nature is what is being incentivized in this economy. So we have to be protecting and preserving the standard of living of our people by retraining them, not merely by subsidizing or giving them a government handout, but by helping them step up to the plate of the current economy, if you will.
Cars do. What did cars do? Cars destroyed horses, camels, and donkeys. That's why when cars were created, they were called a horseless carriage, you see? And people were afraid to ride on cars. I'm not going to ride on that, people would say. That doesn't have a horse, yes? But then the neighbor would pick up a car, and he would get to work in 15 minutes when before it would take him an hour. So the guy next door felt compelled to buy a car as well, but he did the math. He said, well, I'm going to get to my mother-in-law faster as well. So, yes, the thing is that creative destruction is scary, yes? And whenever something, an idea like this is presented, the main actors in a system are put in alert, and they do anything and everything to eclipse any given effort to bring about effective creative destruction. I think that what we need to do is raise the level of awareness in the global south through the power of the NGOs in the developed world that have the capital and can actually press politicians in the first world that would in turn press politicians in the global south in order to change the modus operandi that has arrested the development of our people. Once that gets resolved, we have so many more ideas for the development of rural people. For example, crowdfunding is an amazing idea whereby women can be empowered. Say I worked in Wall Street and the global financial crisis, you can imagine. Say that you have 15 entrepreneurial projects in a village in Uganda, yes? And I have access to a pool of 150 investors in the city, yes? And I can go to your village in Uganda and securitize those 150 or 15 entrepreneurial projects in Uganda and make it into a mutual fund, yes? Then those entrepreneurs would not have to take out loans. They would have investors, yes, with skin in the game.